that he probably academically the best qualified prime minister that any country has ever had. That's an interesting question, that when you have a person with real scholarship who becomes prime minister, does it make a difference? And I think most people around the world have said that it does. And frankly, people, top level leadership, etc., when they interacted with him, that is something that came through. You know, after all, as the Prime Minister of India, by definition, he is a very important person. I mean, because people meet him, this is the Prime Minister of India. But that personal quality of what sort of a person he is, I think that came out in many, many interactions. I think people wanted to hear his views. So I'm just going to mention one or two, which it'll add a little bit, I think, to what I've said in the foreword. See, one is that this is something that I haven't actually written about at all, but it happened when Narasimha Rao Ji, as Prime Minister, went to New York, and he was speaking at the UN. And as Finance Minister, Dr. Singh was part of the delegation, and as Finance Secretary, I was also somewhere lower down in that list. And we were all getting ready to go home. And when the Prime Minister leaves a hotel, there's a lot of protocol and this and that. So basically, the Prime Minister was going to leave from the front of the Waldorf Astoria. But on the side road, a lot of the other cars were lined up. And I was put in the same car as Dr. Manmohan Singh. So we were waiting for the cavalcade or motorcade to take off. At that time, in the Sikh community in New York, there were lots of people protesting that in the aftermath of the anti-Sikh riots in Delhi, there was a lot of unhappiness, anger, and so on. So there was about 20, 30 people sort of holding banners of protest. So the police told us that, look, I don't think there'll be a problem, but you should know. I said, fine. Then it's very interesting that there were these guys protesting, making a formal protest. And suddenly I noticed that two of them, 2 Sikhs actually, had spotted that Dr. Manmohan Singh is standing next to a car on the side. And I noticed that they detached themselves from the main crowd, went a little bit up the road, then crossed over. So I warned him. I said, these guys are going to come and talk to you. He said, that's fine. So, they took this convoluted route and came back, and they did want to talk to him and said, Sat Sri Akal, how are you, etc. And Dr. Singh said, tell me, why are you so angry and protesting and so on? And, they said, the main reason we are protesting is because of the sort of aftermath of this perception that there is protest. It's very difficult for us to get visas to get to India. These are people who they were not Indian citizens. They were obviously immigrants who were Sikhs, who had American passports, who needed a visa. So he said, look, I don't think that's and they said, they had a greatly exaggerated idea. They won't let us go in, we'll get arrested, this, that, and the other. So he talked to them, very nicely. And said, no, I assure you that's not the case. You apply for visas, you'll get them, and I'll explain also to the embassy that there shouldn't be this problem and so on. So, it was an interesting case where people paint a picture that, the whole community has a certain view. And of course, you can get people to make a protest anywhere. But when you talk to them, you really realize what is it that's really bugging them. And I thought he was exceptionally good at kind of going behind what may be a public posture and to find out really what is the problem and persuading people that, look, everybody wants to help and maybe you're wrong in thinking that, there's a huge confrontation. I saw that again when he was finance minister. And, we were trying to push a computerization of the banks. Now, this has nothing to do with the Sikh community, because this was the whole of Indian banking unions, and I think you know from your experience, Kohli Saab, what the bank unions were like. And they were all political parties: Congress Union, Communist Union, BJP Union, other unions, 5 or 6 different unions, and they were all opposed to computerization. Why? Because they said you lose jobs. So, Dr. Singh, he said, look, first, instead of just issuing a press note, he said, call all the union leaders to my office. Now, bank union leaders had never been invited to the finance minister's office in the past. Okay. So all of them came into his office, got some tea, etc. And he tried to talk to them. And he tried to explain to them that, look, you fellows, these were public sector unions. In those days, public sector banks accounted for 85% or 95%. They're now not that big, but in those days they were. And he said, look, you want the public sector banks to do well. We also want to do well. There are foreign banks, there are also private banks. They're all computerized. If you don't allow public sector banks to computerize, the business will go away to the private sector banks. So what is it that you want? I think deep down they realize, but they still have to make their point. So they all said, no, no. He said, I guarantee you that no job will be lost. They said, no, but that's not enough, because productivity will go up and therefore you won't let employment increase. This is becoming too complicated. But anyway, we spent 1.5 hours. At the end of the day, normally the finance minister would sort of say namaskar or whatever, and thank you for coming, and leave. And then somebody like me, who was the finance secretary, would see them out. Well, Dr. Singh, of course, politeness was an extreme thing. He went to his own door of the finance minister's office, opened it, and said, and all of them line up, and he shook hands with each of them as he saw them. They were all really quite pleased, because getting tea and samosas is normal, but being shook hands and shown out by the finance minister himself is not normal. Towards the end, one of those fellows said, finance minister, I completely disagree with what you have said. Then he paused and he said, I don't mind admitting my son agrees with you. I really felt that was bringing in that human touch. I think what this guy was saying is, look, I have a role to play. I'm a union leader. I have to oppose whatever you're doing. Now, if you're really convinced, by the way, my son thinks you're convinced, then you go and do your job. Don't have everyone to get up and say, I agree with you. But if you speak to them, they understand. You must kind of combine that ability to talk with this notion that deep down, even though they keep protesting, they will not actually disagree. I believe that in our kind of society, that is very crucial.